Hello everyone, welcome to the channel, and in this video we are going to be looking at the full first week of Assassin's Creed Valhalla news, starting with the cinematic reveal trailer from April 30th and finishing with a breakdown of the gameplay reveal from May the 7th. And of course, if you are just here for the gameplay reveal, I will have that timestamp down in the description, and also because this is a full week of news I have to cover, I can't go too deep into everything and have to keep it relatively, concise to cover the whole week. But if you do want more specific news, I will have all the sources I've used linked down in the description as well, so if you want to see those are there for you. But with that said, there isn't really much else to intro here, it's just, news. So, yeah, without further ado, let's start the video. So, the first bit of news we got for Assassin's Creed Valhalla was, of course, the cinematic trailer, which sort of opened the gate for the flood of news that came out early this week. And this trailer is actually one that gave a bit of a bad first impression for quite a few fans, myself included, focusing mostly on the Viking aspect of the game and seemingly leaving any assassin elements mostly in the background. But even after watching just the developer commentary, which came out essentially right after that, and is also actually the first piece of news I'd like to talk about for the week, things started to look up. One of the first things mentioned in the developer commentary is actually the settlement aspect of Valhalla's gameplay, and while this mechanic isn't gone into in great detail in the commentary, there was certainly a lot of news about it. And one of the most interesting things mentioned about the settlement in interviews is actually how it appears the settlement will play into the world and story of Valhalla, with Valhalla's lead producer Julien Laferrière saying, "It's at the center of our quests and at the center of the decisions you make. We want players to see the consequences of their actions," and expanding to say, "Big story arcs will begin and end here, the impact of your decisions rippling through your growing community." And much of this stuff is also mentioned by Ashraf Ismail, the creative director on Valhalla, who mentions raids also being connected to the settlement. And these statements seem to make it out that Valhalla is going to have, say, a more pared back and deliberate approach to its open world, with Laferrière saying, "Instead of exploring one territory, then moving on to another, and having no real opportunity or reason to return, the settlement changes the structure, so you'll go on an adventure and then be encouraged to come back to your settlement." Which makes it sound as though the focus in the open world this time might be more about the quality and depth of the content rather than the sheer amount of content. Another example that the Valhalla team appear to be putting quality over quantity can actually be found in an interview with Ashraf Ismail in a Game Informer article, where Ashraf discussed how gear and abilities will be handled in Valhalla. And this I found to actually be one of the most interesting pieces of news from this first week, as Ashraf Ismail says here that every piece of gear will be unique and upgradable, rather than having many duplicate items that you just end up ultimately selling, like in Odyssey. Saying you can use gear from the beginning of the game to the end of the game, and the gear will also be customizable after a certain point in the game. But moving on to abilities, this news is both very interesting and also somewhat confusing, with Ashraf Ismail saying, "Based on the skills you have, you gain power. That's how we look at the mechanic in the world. It's really about your capacities and what you can do. Yes, there is a rating that is given, which encompasses at some point your gear as well, but it's really about the skills you learned, what you can do, and that value is rated, so it's a sense of power rather than levels." Now, at first I found this statement to be actually somewhat confusing, due I think in part to its wording, but I do think that what it really just means is that rather than the player gaining direct benefits from leveling up, like the health and damage boost you get each time you level up in Origins or in Odyssey, the levels are essentially going to serve just as a metric for the game devs to kind of guide player progression through the game, in a similar way to the recommended level system for quests in Origins Odyssey again, but without as much of a focus on leveling up and grinding XP, which I think is a very good change for the game. In fact, a further reinforcement of this move away from grinding I was able to find is in a Push Square article where Ashraf Ismail is quoted as saying, "Our goal here is to just let players play the content they want. So people want to focus on narrative, there's no issue there. People want to focus on their settlement, again, no issue there. It's really up to the players to decide how they want to consume the content. That's always been our angle." And this actually sounds to me as though the approach of content here is actually more like that of older AC games, from before the switch to an RPG format, where there was at times a wealth of content in the world the player could partake in, but all of that content was ultimately optional. So I think this approach of having lots of additional content, but not requiring the player to engage in all of that content to access the parts they themselves want, is a good way to please both newer fans who enjoy the RPG angle of recent AC titles, but also plays older fans who enjoy the more narratively closely focused approach of older AC titles. Coming back to the dev commentary for a moment, another big feature of Valhalla talked about here is, of course, combat, and with this developer commentary, Ashraf Ismail mentions the ability to dual-wield weapons as well as shields, but also talks about the way they're approaching combat in Valhalla, mentioning a more brutal and visceral-feeling combat system. And Ashraf further elaborated on a lot of this stuff in a Game Informer article again, where he mentions the focus on using iconic weaponry from the Viking Age, but also talks about enemy variety, mentioning unique capacities, as well as enemies having the ability to use the environment and each other to surprise the player, stating a desire to have enemies still have surprises in store for the player, even after many hours in the game. Now, a more unique mechanic, this time mentioned on the Assassin's Creed Valhalla website, is the ability to create and share customizable Viking raiders, a system that actually appears quite similar to that of the pawn system from Dragon's Dogma, something picked up on by GamesRadar. And the brief mention about this feature on the Assassin's Creed website, though, actually appears to reveal quite a bit about this system, stating that these characters will be recruitable by players and, while not actually playable themselves, will earn players rewards while in the worlds of other players who recruit them. Now, one particularly interesting source of information on Valhalla actually comes from the game's pre-order page at Ubisoft, specifically the Ultimate Edition pre-order, where we can see many of the bonus items included in the Ultimate Pack, which is bundled with this edition of the game, and this pack actually appears to reveal a fair few things about what Valhalla's content might hold. For example, the Berserker Longship pack appears to indicate that cosmetic ship customization will likely exist in the game, as it shows a picture of a ship boasting a distinct sail and figurehead design to that of the ship we see in one of the game's screenshots. The Berserker Settlement pack seemingly shows that there will be customization available in Valhalla's settlement as well, showing statues and a tree that appear to be items that can be placed somewhere in the settlement most likely, though whether these items will be purely cosmetic or possess actual mechanics to them isn't shown in any way here. But one particularly curious thing in this pack is the set of runes, which gives no real indication as to what role these things might play in Valhalla, because it really just shows a carving of a horse that appears to be etched in stone. And finally, the last interesting item in the Ultimate Pack is the wolf from the Berserker Gear Pack, which appears to hint at the existence of some form of animal companions, which could actually be quite an interesting and likely feature in Valhalla, seeing as the option to temporarily recruit animal followers did exist in Origins, so this could actually be quite a natural next step in that gameplay evolution. Before moving on to story news, though, I do want to briefly cover something that, while it doesn't actually pertain directly to Valhalla's content, is still important to note, and that is that Valhalla will be using Microsoft's Smart Delivery system, which means if you purchase the game on Xbox One, you will receive a free upgrade to the Xbox Series X version if you buy that console. And this is obviously a very nice feature to have for a cross-gen title like Valhalla. However, I don't know if Sony have actually confirmed anything similar with PS4 and PS5 versions of the game, but hopefully they will, because of course it would really suck for people to have to buy the game twice based on what platform they purchase it on. Looking more at story-related stuff now, a big piece of story news I want to touch on is the GameSpot interview with Darby McDevitt, Valhalla's narrative director, which obviously covers a sort of broad strokes look at what Valhalla's story will hold, and also covers a lot of interesting information on Eivor's character. The interview reveals, among other sources, that the story will begin in the 870s AD in Norway, but will quickly move to England where most of the game will take place. But I think that really, since most of the story stuff is fairly broad strokes, most of the interesting stuff in the interview is the information given about Eivor, as Eivor's character is likened somewhat to Edward Kenway's, with Darby McDevitt saying in reference to this connection, "On the highest level, we could say it's a very similar role. In the beginning, it's an outsider looking in, and Eivor is introduced to the conflict and the characters who are a part of this conflict, and they're drawn into it in a way because their goals are aligned frequently. And this does correspond fairly closely with Edward's story in Black Flag, starting out as someone who is a part of the conflict but doesn't fully understand his place in it until later in the story." And then looking in more to characteristics, McDevitt has said of Eivor, "They're definitely a leader, they have a sense of humor. I wouldn't call them wisecracking, but they're not stone-faced." And McDevitt also makes reference to the way that the team have approached role-playing with Eivor as a character, saying they've gone with a more coherent character this time compared to Odyssey, where each of the choices given to the player in dialogue represent the character they've created, rather than one that is, or a character that is fully defined by the player. Now, one other interesting piece of role-playing related news revealed in a Metro article revolves around which gender choice for Eivor is canon, as of course in Odyssey, despite the existence of two characters, Alexios and Cassandra, only Cassandra was considered canon. However, in Valhalla it appears that actually both the male and female versions of Eivor will be canon, something revealed again by Darby McDevitt, who stated, "Both choices are canon, but we're not going to spoil how we manage that trick until you play the game." And actually I'm quite interested to see this, as this does seem like quite the interesting feat to pull off, so I am very interested to see how they have actually done it. And now, one final thing I want to touch on here is the explanation given for Eivor wearing the hidden blade on the outside of his arm in the cinematic, as of course, since the foundation of the Assassins, the hidden blade has always been worn on the inside of the arm. And while Ashraf Ismail did explain this choice in the developer commentary, I've got to say I find the answer he gave a bit odd, as what Ashraf Ismail has said is the reason for Eivor wearing the hidden blade on the outside of his arm is he believes this is such a kick-ass weapon that why would you want to hide it from your enemies? And I gotta be honest, I think this answer is either a bit of a lie to avoid spoilers, or it's just, quite frankly, one of the weirdest or dumbest things I've ever heard with regards to Assassin's Creed. Alright, so now we've made it to the gameplay trailer. And this trailer is an interesting one, as while it is fairly short, it's only a little over a minute, it certainly shows off a lot of the game. So I figure what we'll do is just watch through the trailer and break it down as we go. So the first thing we get to see in this gameplay trailer is a few shots of what appears to be a Viking settlement, and I suppose it could even be the player's settlement, but one really nice thing about this settlement is that it's very nice looking, and it's also packed with detail and clutter, something that was a bit of a weaker element in more recent AC titles, which often had fairly sparse environments. But another thing about this building is that it's also very nicely lit, with lots of dark shadows and radiating lights. Now here we see another statue similar to the one in the cinematic trailer, as well as those in the Ultimate Pack, and we also see Eivor still sporting the hidden blade on the outside of his arm, with some very nice shine on it from a little beam of light in the frame. In the next shot, we see Eivor again, this time sporting some very nice tattoos, which, as far as I understand, will actually be part of character customization along with hairstyles. Next we see a few shots of a Viking longship sailing down a river amongst some snowy mountains, followed by a shot of that same ship approaching some cliffs and rolling hills. So I think this sequence is meant to show us the trip that Eivor takes from Norway to England early in the game. Alright, so here it appears we have a few shots showing us the world of Dark Ages England, starting with this shot of a hilltop with some sort of runestone on it, and this shot actually shows quite a few nice features of Valhalla's visuals, showing us some nice draw distance and also a lot of varied environments, with this green clearing in the foreground on the hill, a forest valley down below, some rocky mountains off in the back middle of the frame, and even a more snowy environment off to the right. But another thing I think this shot shows off is how dense the world of Valhalla appears to be, with all these environments butting up against one another and vying for space, as opposed to the vast, spread-out worlds of Origin's sandy deserts and Odyssey's ocean, which often feel quite empty, and I think this density might help to make the world feel more alive and independent of the player, rather than this lonely, lifeless, sandbox world expanse made just for them. After the shot, we see a couple of lower angles again of a knight, some trees, a church, and of course, Stonehenge. And all these shots show off again some very nice lighting with light shafts peeking through the clouds behind the trees and Stonehenge, and also some nice low fog off in the distance from the night. So here we see some soldiers carrying torches. This guy, who, I don't know, could just be here to show off higher quality faces. But then we see the Viking ships arriving, Eivor jumping out, sounding his horn, and then running into battle. Next, we see Eivor just knee someone in the face, which I guess is pretty cool. We see something looking like a siege or a raid underway with a battering ram and some fortifications. Then we see Eivor tackle a man and then murder him. We see Eivor throwing axes, which is actually an ability in the game, as stated by Ashraf Ismail in the dev commentary on the cinematic trailer. And I actually think it's possible that we could see the knee to the face and the tackle we just saw as also abilities in the game, given that this is, of course, just free cam capture of some gameplay, so, being able to knee someone or tackle them and then murder them would be pretty fun. Finally, we see Eivor standing in front of some burning buildings and smoke, presumably after the raid we just witnessed. We then get a close-up of his face with some very nicely detailed eyes and skin. The title shows up, and then we see Eivor's Raven replacement for Senu, or Ikanos, up close for the first time as well. And that's the end of the trailer. So all in all, I think this trailer is a very nice showcase of the game's engine, as well as its gameplay. Though it would have been nice to see a bit more of kind of the meat of the gameplay, some more like actual shots of Eivor fighting with other enemies. We do see some of that, but it's mostly just shots of like big gameplay events from interesting angles. But aside from that, I think one very cool thing about the trailer is how it seems to try to almost tell a story in a way, as it follows Eivor through this journey in the trailer, starting in Norway in the Viking building where the game is set to begin, and then showing us the journey Eivor takes from Norway to England, showing that land, and then finally capping all that off with Eivor raiding and pillaging. Viking stuff. So everything we see in the trailer is all part of one sequence of events, which is just kinda neat. But anyway, that's all I really have to say on this trailer. It's a very good one, it's very cool. Would have been nice to see more meat of the gameplay, but all in all, very interesting. If you do have anything to note on this trailer or this news, drop that down in the comments if you're feeling it. And with that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video.